If you're someone who makes $50,000 a year, let's level set at first. That means that on an hourly basis, if you were paid by the hour, that's the equivalent of about $24 per hour. If you are an individual that falls into that income threshold, that puts you in the 35th percentile of income earners amongst individuals. Or if that's your household income, $50,000 a year, that puts you in the 30th percentile of income of household earners in this country.
Yeah, and take-home pay, if you're trying to figure out what is actually coming in and so that you can spend, it's around $3,700 a month, and that's assuming you're married filing jointly, 2026 tax rules, standard deductions, W-2 wages, no state local taxes.
And so if we're going to think about someone who is at that income level, about $3,700, we're going to try to figure out how do we compartmentalize how much they have for needs, how much they have for wants, and then how much they should be saving. And based on that, we also want to arrive at, okay, where would be a reasonable emergency fund for someone in that realm? And so if you make $50,000 a year, again, depending on your spending, you're probably going to need an emergency fund somewhere around $10,000 to $20,000. That's going to represent for you and your family somewhere between 3 months to 6 months of living expenses in liquid cash readily available.
Now, here's where I think the magic is about to happen, is because we need to talk about at $50,000, we're realistic and understand that a lot of your money is going to be budgeted towards living expenses.
That's right, towards your needs.
And so we understand, look, when we've covered this type of content in the past, we've done what's called a 50-30-20 split, which is 50% needs, 30% wants, 20% savings. But it seems a little tone deaf if we tried to say you should have 20% savings rate on a $50,000 income. So we've actually adjusted this. But what did we do to make this a little more realistic?
Yeah, we wanted to be as close to reality as possible. And again, disclaimer here, we recognize that making $50,000 in a high cost of living area like Los Angeles is very different than making $50,000 in a lower cost of living area like Southern Georgia. But on average, if we're going to think about how to budget that $3,700 of take-home pay that you're receiving, what it likely might look like is probably 75% of that amount would be going towards needs. That'd be about $2,800 a month. About 15% would go towards wants, or a little over $550. And you would likely be able to save around 10% of the net, or we like to think about gross savings rate. That would be a 9% gross savings rate on $50,000 a year. I think on average across the country, that 75-15-10 would likely work in most areas in the country.
Yeah, now, a lot of, because this is the first category we're setting up. That needs is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. This is covering your shelter, your food, and those type of things. More of the wants is really kind of that buffer of unexpected things that are showing up every month. And then I think it's important because when we say 10% savings on this slide, we're talking about net.
Yep.
Whereas everybody's like, wait a minute, Money Guy doesn't do net. So what does this mean? You're exactly right. If you're paying attention, we gross this up on our next slide to 10% net for somebody at $50,000 is actually 9% gross savings rate.
So if we assume that this is where you are you able to build wealth? Obviously, a vast majority of your pay is going towards the needs and then also going towards the wants and those unexpected expenses. So if all you're able to save is $370 per month, can you actually build wealth? What we found is for a 20-year-old, if you were able to start saving and investing and you just saved that $370 every month for the entirety of your working career over 45 years, by the time that you got to retirement, you would still be able to build up a portfolio of nearly $2 million. It came in at just over $1.95 million.
All the inflation trolls are going to be, I hope they celebrate this because we put this in there because everybody's always like, make sure you're honest with everybody. And everybody knows 1.9, close to $2 million, if you just applied the 4% safe withdrawal rule, that's close to $80,000 a year. That sounds great, but we wanted to be honest and we said, let's pull this back and make it in today's dollars, meaning inflation adjusted. And what's interesting is that means that turns out close to $2 million for the 20-year-old. really is the retirement or expense replacement amount of close to $21,000.
And remember, this is a person who is making $50,000 a year. So it's not replacing a huge portion of their income. If you're a 25-year-old that just started saving, we believe that you could build a portfolio up to about $1.3 million. And if you don't start saving until 30 years old and you have a $50,000 annual salary, saving 9% of your gross income or 10% of the net would get you to just a touch under $850,000 in your portfolio by the time you retire.
You know, one of the things that I think makes the magic with the way we do things here at the Money Guy Show is we always say if you're a single person who makes under $100,000, I want you to count your employer match. If you're a married couple and you make more or less than $200,000, count your employer match. And people say, why? Why do you have different rules based upon income? It's because the lower your income, the closer you are to the social safety net. And we know one of the biggest things that helps the majority of Americans who are definitely in the lower income side of things is Social Security. And if you did the research, you'd find out that Social Security benefit typically is around $2,081 a month, which comes out to be right under $25,000 a year for people receive it. So if you add that to these projected retirement incomes that are brought to present dollars, you quickly see now the income replacement. Man, this is pretty incredible because you did a lot with a little.
Yeah, said a little bit differently. A 20-year-old just saving 9% of their gross income, but a $50,000 income with Social Security would still have the opportunity to replace 91% of their pre-retirement income by the time that they get to retirement. 25-year-old is still able to replace 82% once you factor in Social Security. And even if you don't start until 30 years old and you're saving 10% of your net take-home pay, by the time that you get to retirement, if you factor in Social Security based on the average or the median Social Security income in this country, you would still be able to replace 74% of your pre-retirement income at retirement.
And I'll echo something. It's ridiculous to echo something I just said 3 minutes ago or 2 minutes ago. But remember, if you make at this level of income, you get to count your employer's money. So there's a chance that there are people here that are going to save 6% because they have a 50-cent per dollar contribution on their 401k, get 3% for their employer. So we're actually building an entire successful retirement off of just funding your 401k. Guys, do you see how powerful your army of dollars can be if you're just early and often with the savings? A lot of you are watching this and you're like, well, what do I need to be saving based upon my income? We would encourage you to go moneyguy.com/resources. We actually have a great deliverable. You can actually go look at your age, when you want to retire. We'll give you the answer on how much you should be saving and investing.
All right, Brian. So we walked through the numbers of what it could look like building wealth at a $50,000 income, but what's the mindset? What are the behavioral things that you need to be thinking about in order to get ahead? And this is not going to be incredibly surprising. The very first thing at this income level, we want you to be intentional. You've likely already discovered there's not a ton of margin. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the system. So that means you have to be very, very intentional with every dollar. Understand where it's going and don't let your dollars be wasted.
Well, every dollar has to have a plan. As I just shared with you guys, you can find success with as little as 6% savings rate. So if you're one of these people, yes, you don't make a lot of money. Maybe you're just starting out and adulting is kicking your rear. Don't let that be a cope that you say, I just can't save. I'll put it off until I'm 30. I'll put it off until I'm 40. No. Do a little bit. I don't care if it's just you setting up $1,000 a year. Do something so that you can start rolling that boulder down the hill and create success for your future self.
And then we want you to avoid the mindless spending. It's not at this income level, you don't have the luxury of not thinking through your consumption and thinking through your purchases. And as you're thinking through those, we want to make sure that you are aware that compound interest can be your absolute best ally unless you let it turn into your fiercest adversary and you start racking up consumer debt and you start charging balances on credit cards. Because if you do that, you begin digging a hole that is going to be incredibly difficult to get out of at this income
And to
level.
give you context on what that looks like is think about the average credit card monthly payment. is around $181 a month.
We just said we wanted you to save in $370, and most people have half that going towards credit card payments.
So you can quickly see that if you're not paying your credit card off every month, you probably should be in no-go land with credit cards, because you don't want to have your future self and your future success being gutted by bad consumption decisions.
And the last thing, when we think about what we want your mindset to be and how we want you to approach building wealth at this income level, is be patient. Recognize that at a lower income, at $50,000 a year, it's likely going to take longer to hit some of your goals. It might take longer to build up that emergency fund, to pay off that high interest debt, to get to the point to where you're maxing out your Roth IRA. That's okay. If you start early enough and you give it time, time can overcome the lack of margin, the lack of flexibility in your system, but you have to be patient. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and that's okay.
Yeah, when you're young, early and often, you're literally a billionaire of time. And I know it can feel like, hey, how is this actually going to make a difference? And that's why, once again, go to moneyguy.com/resources. Play around with our wealth multiplier tool so you can keep yourself motivated, or even print this thing out. You hear about people who try to get their beach bods ready, or they put a swimsuit up next to the mirror. You can do the exact same thing with our wealth multiplier. If you need to keep perspective on how every dollar has value, this is something that will help you stick with it so you can be patient.